Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on Unpacking Sustainable Tourism in India through the lens of the GSTC Criteria. This is a webinar that is being organized by the GSTC India Working Group. My name is Aditi Chinchani and I'm a member of the India Working Group and will be moderating today's webinar and the session. I would like to thank all the participants, and I know there are many more registering and logging in as the session continues. And I really thank all of you all for joining in the session today. We've got three main speakers. We've got for our webinar today, we have Mr. C.V. Ramkumar, or Ram, that as he's known to many of us. He's a board member, and the South Asia Director of the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. He will introduce us to the GSTC as well as the India Working Group. We have with us Mr. Arvind Singh, who is the Secretary, Ministry of Tourism, Government of India, as a keynote speaker. So we'd like to thank you if you're there. We do know that he's been in back-to-back meetings, so hopefully he should be joining us soon. Okay, there's just a message that I read which said in 5 minutes he would be with us. So we've got Mr. Arvind Singh as our keynote speaker. And then as our third speaker for the evening is Mr. Durband, who is the CEO of GSTC. He will speak to us on the global impact of GSTC on sustainable tourism. This will be followed by an open discussion of Q&A. And as Roy mentioned that, if you all do have any questions, please post them on the Q&A chat and we will be able to sort of take it up during that session. That's something to just sort of keep in mind. So let me go ahead and introduce our first speaker to you, Ram, who is, as I had mentioned, is a member of the GSTC Board of Directors and has been with GSTC since its inception, and now is the chair of the GSTC India Working Group. He has been influential in the adoption of the National Sustainable Tourism Standards, the Sustainable Tourism Criteria of India, that the Ministry of Tourism had put together and brought out in 2010, which drew heavily from the GSTC criteria. Ram is an author, speaker, trainer, consultant, an entrepreneur, and an expert in applied sustainability. He developed a model of sustainable living when he built the first 100% eco resort, our native village in Bangalore, in India. Over the last decade, he has extended his expertise to sustainable living, working on various issues of sustainable food, sustainable health, sustainable services, as well as in marketing and branding, and is now developing a model of integrated agriculture while implementing farming techniques ranging from high-tech hydroponic farming to nature-identical food forests in his farm called Rasabag Farms. Ram has been an advertising and marketing professional for 2 decades, which took him to global companies like Saatchi & Saatchi, Ogilvy and Mather, Publicis and Standard Charter. I would hand over the session now to Ram to take us through in terms of introducing the GSTC as well as the India Working Group. Ram, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Aditi. Thank you for the introduction. And so welcome to everybody. What I will be doing now is taking everybody through who and what is GSTC, the GSTC criteria, and I'll explain the criteria. What are the activities of GSTC at a global level, and what are the activities of GSTC at an India level? So let's kind of launch directly into it. So the Global Sustainable Tourism Council is the leading global authority in setting and maintaining standards for sustainable travel and tourism. So we are a standard setting body and we set standards for sustainable tourism. Now, every time I talk about this in the beginning, people ask, but what do we need this for? The starting point really is the customer. Increasingly, we are having demands from the consumers for some way for the consumer to be able to identify venues that they go to, which are sustainable, hotels that they go to, which are sustainable. So much so, there are various people who've been publishing guides and publishing some kind of a methodology for the tourists and travelers to be able to sift through the real from the not so real. Because of this, it was needed, there was a need for sustainable tourism standards to be set. 70% of global travelers say that they are more likely to book an accommodation knowing it was eco-friendly, whether they were looking for a sustainable stay or not. This is a 2019 report from bookings.com. It's quite an extensive study that they had done. Now, let's get into what do we mean by sustainability. Now, traditionally, the discussion on sustainability unfortunately centered around just green and environmental issues. Now, sustainability is more than all of this. It's more than just environment. So when we talk of sustainable tourism, we are following the guidelines set up by the United Nations in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, where the United Nations talks about all-round sustainability, holistic sustainability, not just environmental sustainability. Of course, environmental sustainability is important, but not just. We're talking about overall sustainability. So the way we define it is tourism that takes into account its current and future economic, social, and environmental impacts, addressing the needs of visitors, the industry, the environment, and host communities. So you can see here, it's not just environment, it's economic sustainability, it's social sustainability, and we are talking of everybody, the visitors, the industry, the environment, and the host communities. So you can see here that sustainability is much more than environment. And this is a very important distinction that all of us need to make because of the fact that everybody thinks sustainability is only green. So I need to emphasize this point as a starting point for this discussion so that everybody is on the same page. Now, sustainable tourism also does not refer to a specific type of tourism. That's another little trap that we fall into, where I've had people say that, oh, you know, we are in ecotourism, the other people, they are in regular tourism. No, sustainable tourism does not refer to a specific type of tourism. Whichever sector of tourism you are in, sustainable tourism is applicable because we want the overall tourism business to be more sustainable. Sustainable tourism is an aspiration for the impacts of all forms of tourism. So be it tourism in which involves wildlife or into nature or into historical places or for religious tourism. The discussion is that all kinds of tourism should be sustainable. So it's not a single type of tourism that we are trying to target. Now, the biggest challenge that comes up is how to recognize what is sustainable tourism. And that's a challenge that many people from the industry, especially a lot of travel companies, have approached us and said, how do we make out who is sustainable and who is not? And it's unfortunately complicated because of these thousands of labels that we see in front of you. Many standards have been created by many people around the world. We know presently of over 180 certification schemes: Green Hotel, Eco-Certified, Bio Hotels, Green Star, Green Seal, Green Mark. There are many, many of those. So when we look at this entire screen, how do we siphon through and figure out what is it that is sustainable? And that's where the GSTC comes into play. Now, when you talk about GSTC, let's look at the origins of GSTC. The founding organizations were the United Nations, the UNWTO, UNEP, Rainforest Alliance. In 2007, a coalition of 32 partners initiated by the Rainforest Alliance, the United Nations Environmental Program, as it was called then, now it's called UN Environment, the United Nations Foundation, and the World Tourism Organization, they created GSTC. Now, the purpose was what I said in the previous slide: to foster and increase understanding of sustainable tourism practices and to adopt a universal sustainable tourism set of principles. So in 2008, we developed a set of baseline criteria that was organized around the 4 pillars of sustainability. And we'll go a bit into those sort of details as we go along. Interestingly and importantly, the GSTC criteria is all about positivity. It is all a question of what we can do rather than what we can't or what we should not do. So the criteria development as such, the first criteria development, more than 80,000 people participated in it, including conservationists, tourism industry leaders, governments, UN agencies. They all commented on the resulting standards. We analyzed more than 4,500 criteria from over 60 existing certification standards and other voluntary set of criteria and principles and guidelines. Now, the GSTC criteria, we revised them because we are part of the ICIL Alliance, which is, they have a code of best practice and standard setting code. So we have to keep revising our standards and updating it as we go along, because it has to be a live document and not something that is frozen in time. So as such, the GSTC undergoes a revision process that is very rigorous. It's open to public consultation every few years, depending on what the need is. So 2 sets of criteria have been developed until now: the criteria for industry, hotels and tour operators, and the criteria for destinations. Now, the criteria for the industry, it's based on 4 pillars. So it's not just environmental. It's sustainability management, it is social and economic, it is cultural, and it is environmental. We'll look very briefly as to what each of these mean. So when you take a sustainability management, what we talk of is, has a business demonstrated sustainable management? And what do we mean by this? For proper management, which is very, very essential, we refer to legal compliance, accurate promotion, access, rights, information. We've had instances in India where we've had resorts bordering forest ranges which were closed down because they were actually on land which is not approved by the government. Eventually, the law catches up, and unfortunately, those resorts were closed down. This refers to sustainable management. How do we ensure, or we should ensure, that everything about our business is sustainable, which means it is legal and it matches the law of the local law of the land. The second one is economic and social benefits. We talk here of the consumer community support, local purchasing, community services. What is it that the local society, how do they benefit from the existence of a tourism business in a particular area? Because if the locals don't benefit, what happens is we will lose community support, which means it starts to threaten the existence of the business as a whole. So we want it to be a sustainable business. That's what this refers to. Third is cultural heritage. Culture is a very, very important part of society and as well as tourism. So we refer to both tangible and intangible cultural heritage. Most of the travel today is done for that, so that people can experience culture in its full form, especially now post-COVID. There are lots of people trying to explore India. What are we trying to explore in India? Just not nature about India. There are cultural aspects of India that people want to explore, and that is something which is a global phenomenon. That's what this refers to. And last but not the least, of course, environmental sustainability. Here we divide it into further subsections for conserving resources, reducing pollution and climate change impacts, conserving biodiversity, ecosystem, and landscapes. So these are the 4 pillars that the hotel and tour operators criteria is built on. Similarly, we have them done for destinations also, where we go through the same 4 pillars for destination sustainability. Now, why do we have to use the GSTC criteria? Now, the GSTC criteria is applicable worldwide. It's a set of general criteria that anywhere in the world one can follow. It is not country specific, and it has been written in a manner where it is applicable anywhere in the world. It is not specific to any country. So it can be used in Korea, Taiwan, Germany, Chile, Thailand, wherever. It is suitable for all kinds of countries. It is not just the small countries, where it is applicable. from a country as large as India or China to a small country as Seychelles or Norway or Sweden. It's applicable for all kinds of countries. It is applicable for large and small business destinations. It's applicable for urban and rural areas. So the criteria has been written. And as you notice what I said earlier, the building of the criteria is a rigorous process. That rigor we went through to ensure that the criteria is applicable to all these kinds of businesses overall in tourism. Of course, the criteria is because it was born out of the United Nations system. It applies to the Sustainable Development Goals. We can trace which are the Sustainable Development Goals that are fulfilled when we talk about each of the criteria for either destinations or hotels and tour operators. Now, there are various programs under GSTC. I want to take you through that very quickly because this talk is meant to get you familiar with all the terms and the broad issues. Later on, we will have more webinars to talk about specific issues. So what are the programs? One program is the accreditation program, where the accreditation and verification standards and certifying bodies. There's a market access program, which increases demand and access to sustainable products. And there is a sustainable tourism training program and a destination management program. Now, each of these programs are administered and looked after by an expert group within GSTC to ensure that all the technical inputs are available for each of these programs. Now, all of them are driven, of course, by the GSTC criteria. Now, I want to talk briefly about the role of sustainability standards. I say this because we all need some kind of a plan, some kind of a framework to follow. In India, we have, and so much so even in many other parts of the world, there is anecdotal evidence of sustainability in pockets. Some people do it, some people don't. Now, how do we arrive at a common denominator, a framework, an institutional framework, so that everybody can follow something which is similar, and therefore it can we'll have a basis of standardization. That's the role of sustainability standards. And we need that for certification. We need that for education and awareness programs. We need that for legal and regulatory codes. So for example, the government of India and Gujarat, for example, in the draft policy, they talked about how travel operators would get 50% of their certification costs reimbursed. Now, how does one judge which travel operator is following that? So the government needs some kind of a basis, and that's where the sustainability standards come in. It comes for measurement and evaluation, and for market access clarity for the OTAs in specific. Now, market access clarity and certification, they kind of go hand in hand, because large online travel agents who kind of dominate the marketing of resorts and hotels, they need some kind of clarity to say that who is sustainable, who is not, because nobody wants to make the judgment themselves. So we need a strong global body to make that judgment call, and which is where the standards come in and which is where GSTC comes in. So the role of certification is to verify the validity of claims and fighting, especially greenwashing. A resort can say, they are doing everything possible from a sustainability perspective. But who's there to certify that? And who's there to verify that? That is where the certification comes in. Certification bodies do that verification. It plays a role of risk management mitigation, and it provides discipline for improvement. So if people want to move from point A to point B in terms of moving up the sustainability landscape, this helps them. And of course, market access function, like I just mentioned here earlier. Now, there are certification bodies who do the certification. So certification is defined as a voluntary third-party assessment through an audit of a tourism enterprise or destination for conformity to a standard. Remember, each of these words are important. It's defined as a voluntary third-party assessment. So what I'm trying to say is GSTC does not conduct certification. We are not a certification body. The job of certification is done by certification bodies. And you have many of them all over the world. Bureau Veritas is one of them. Control Union is another one of them. ISO standards are, are also available where all these certification bodies use. So certification is done completely by a third party, and it is done through a rigorous process of audit, and that is how a business is certified. Now, I want to make a difference on accreditation. So certification bodies have to be accredited to the GSTC standards. So accreditation is a mark of quality that GSTC places on certification bodies that choose our independent and neutral process to verify that they certify businesses such as hotels or tour operators or destinations in a competent and neutral manner. So certification bodies apply to GSTC for them to become accredited to our standards. And we at GSTC take a look very, very hard at their processes of certification. We need to ensure that they have the processes, the people, the resources, and qualified auditors in place to actually do the final audit. So we do that. And of course, the accreditation is again done by an independent body as per the norms set by United Nations processes. Why is all this happening? And market access, especially with the OTAs, look for labels. Like I said earlier, OTAs need somebody else, a certification body and standard setting body, to tell them who is the one who can be marketed by them. So if you look at these examples that are in front of you, which are products, you have the Forestry Stewardship Council. These are labels that are available, to be put on products. But when it comes to tourism, because we don't have products on the shelf, OTAs require some kind of clarity to say this resort is sustainable, this resort is not, this destination is sustainable, this destination is not. This is where the GSTC label comes in, where once a destination or a tour operator or a hotel goes through the certification process, then they will be highlighted on the OTAs so that everybody will know that they are sustainable. %70 of global travelers say that they were more likely to book an accommodation knowing it was eco-friendly, whether they were looking for a sustainable stay or not. However, when it comes to recognizing a sustainable place to stay, almost 3/4 of global travelers say that they are not aware of the existence of eco labels for vacation accommodations, while well over a third, 37%, affirm that an international standard for identifying eco-friendly accommodation would help encourage them to travel more sustainably. And 62% would feel better about staying in an accommodation if they knew it was an eco label. So you can see very clearly, this is what the customers require, and this is what is needed, when it comes to OTAs. So the market access program for OTAs, bookings.com, which is the largest, OTA in the world, they say that we know that our customers want to make more sustainable decisions and that many of our partners are eager to meet that demand. Together with GSTC, we can help bring more clarity and transparency to the wider tourism industry, travel industry, when it comes to sustainability. Agoda talks about, Agoda's moonshot goal is to mainstream sustainable travel. We have doubled our investments in sustainability and are testing tools to help travelers make more sustainable choices. This is as far as the global scenario is concerned. And hopefully as we go along, there will be Indian OTAs also who will join this entire journey towards sustainability. The other aspect of what we do at GSTC is training. We do large training programs through the year and post-COVID. We do training programs, all of them are virtual. We've been doing this since 2016. These training programs, you can join and you can become, there are various levels of training, of course, for different kinds of interests, depending on what your interests are. So all those training, this is another part of what GSTC does as far as the world is concerned. And of course, we have a destination program.
Ram, 2 minutes.
Yeah, thanks. We have a destination program, which is of particular interest for governments, where there is a particular process, a roadmap process that everybody will go through to make a destination become more sustainable than what it is now. Now, what I want to sort of talk about very briefly is about GSTC and India. We actually launched the GSTC in 2010 in India when Sujit Banerjee those days was the tourism secretary, and he was very interested. And a national standard for India was developed by a committee of experts with the Ministry of Tourism. It's called the Sustainable Tourism Criteria for India. Now, this standard hasn't been actioned as yet, in the sense it hasn't been operationalized, in the sense that tourism certification bodies have not started doing any certification based on the standard. But I'm sure with the conversations we're having in the ministry, that is something that will happen as we sort of go along. Now, recently we formed the India working group at the GSTC. This is specifically to address India as a market, where we wanted to assist policymakers both at the Ministry of Tourism and the Department of Tourism level in the state governments to build in global sustainable tourism principles. And we want to also assist industry stakeholders in the journey towards adopting sustainable tourism principles. Until now, we've given a lot of inputs to enhance the national tourism policy, the rural tourism policy, the Gujarat tourism policy, like I mentioned briefly. There is all GSTCs already been built into the tour operators and the hotels and accommodations. Is just awaiting notification now. Now, this whole thing is happening with a team, and I want to very briefly introduce the team here. We have 4 team members: Aditi, Frida, Rajesh, and myself. Aditi, you already met, and I want each of them to just come forward now and just quickly, briefly introduce themselves so that all of you participating today will know who are the core committee members of the GSTC whom you can reach out to as and when you sort of need them. So Aditi, I will let you introduce yourself first.
Yeah, thanks, Ram. So just a very brief introduction to me. I mean, since I was a young graduate of tourism studies, I've always been interested in looking at the multiple dimensions of tourism and the intersections of, the communities, the societies, the tourists, the traveler, the industry, government, policy makers. And, that has really been my interest and work and engagement of the past 20 years. My longest stint had been with an organization called Equitable Tourism Options, Equations, which is based in Bangalore, which is a national level research policy advocacy organization that looks at the impacts of tourism and looks at policy perspectives from a development point of view, from the local community's point of view. In that organization, I held, a range of roles, going from an associate to a director, and I was with them till 2019. My interests, have been in areas of envisioning models of tourism which are pro-people, equitable, just, tourism that is culturally sensitive, which is appropriate, looking at environmental issues. And I think that encompassing all of that was something that actually drew me to, connecting with Ram, who's been the lone standing member of GSTC for a very long time in India, and coming together and look at, how we can look and work on tourism issues. So I currently work in a couple of states in Himachal and Durband, working with communities and local organizations in the hope to really work towards creating forms or working towards forms of tourism that are meaningful and respectful experiences, sustainable, and in creating local conditions and looking at local policy and local regulations that work for the communities. So yeah, that's briefly my background. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Aditi. Frida, you there? Could you come on and introduce yourself?
Namaste and good evening. I'm obviously elated to be part of this very elite panel of sustainability advocates, and to everyone who have joined us today to partake in India's dialogue, and will continue to journey with us in our mission to carry forward the sustainability bandwagon. On the professional front, I have to my credit 2 organizations that I founded. One is called Dharti, the other is a proprietorship firm, which is called Dharti Green Project. Working obviously to augment applied sciences and the integration of sound research with robust implementation in the sustainability, environment, communities, and tourism domains. Actually, for about 14 years of my 16 years of career, I've been pondering over the term sustainability and how does one seriously apply it to the entire gamut of tourism. How is it important to create value, so to say, in our travel needs? How to choose products and experiences that are holistic in value creation? Especially when we're dealing with nature, natural resources, are we looking at availability, scarcity, employment, commercialization, and appropriation of local culture? So what do we do when we actually get into bringing luxury tourism in remote locations? What do we do to all the waste that is generated? These are some of the points that I've been really dabbling over for so many years. Then I also was, flabbergasted to know there was a lack of standards in the tourism industry when it came to sustainability. Standards basically that included every aspect, every indicator. But during my research and during my many years of, actually looking at impact assessments, I have used the GSTC criteria. But it was only in 2019 that, through the copious amounts of reading and writing, I actually understood the impetus of Global Sustainable Tourism Council. And was to actually, I was able to comprehend and understand the importance of the uniqueness of it to the UN SDGs on a larger platform and the Indian tourism scenario in particular. The Sustainable Tourism training program that I undertook honed me with the professional certificate and ensured my learning in the right direction, so to say. According to me, GSTC is foolproof. I mean, they have neatly laid out specifics for destinations and the governments to obviously better their policy decisions, the industry, which is involving the hotels and tour operators, for corporates and business travel, their entire formal certification bodies, and most important of all of this, the traveler. Having traversed the length and breadth of this beautiful country for intense field work, and having collaborated with governments for stakeholder consultations, community engagements, my vision for the India Working Group is very clear. It's to negotiate and partner with governments, with the ministries, state and the union territories included. The dynamics of sustainable tourism via the GSTC mandates is very interesting for me. Which obviously have juxtaposed the SDGs and how they proliferate the thought process into the actions. At this stage of my career, collaboratives, coalitions, and country missions, which I say 3 C's, really, really interest me. Wrapping up my speech, I'm awed to read 2 fantastic quotes that I completely resonate with. One is by Johan Zeitz, who goes on to say that sustainability is no longer about doing less harm. It is about doing more good. And second, of course, is by Robert Swan, which I love actually. The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. Jai Hind, and many thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you, Frida, for being part of the group. Rajesh, could you come on and introduce yourself? Yeah.
Sorry, hi, good evening, everyone. I hope I'm audible. Can you see me also?
Yes, go on, Rajesh.
Okay, great. So quickly about my professional background. I am actually a hotel management graduate. I have worked about 25 years in the travel and tourism industry, commercially worked with outbound tour operators, worked in inbound and domestic tourism. So promoted lots of India as well as lots of international destinations. But I think it was around 2011 that I came across the term sustainable tourism, and it was just being somewhere there in my head for about 5-6 years. After which I took up the GSTC's Sustainable Tourism Training Program in 2017. And that's when, after taking that program and being acquainted with the GSTC's principles and criteria, is where I really got full time into talking about sustainable tourism. Ultimately, in 2018, I left the commercial part of the the travel industry, and I started my own consulting firm called Provoke Consultancy, which actually does consulting services for tourism development planning, also helping out travel businesses also into growing and adopting sustainable practices. Now, having said this, I must say it's very fulfilling to be part of the GSTC India Working Group and be able to contribute to our country's transformational journey of adopting a responsible and sustainable approach in tourism. When it comes to practicing sustainable tourism, the GSTC criteria provides direction, it defines the scope for implementation, and shows the path for achieving sustainability. So while formulating policies and guidelines for tourism planning and practices, it is recommended to incorporate, based on the GSTC guidelines, since they are very comprehensive, they're time tested, and they're evolving, and they're also flexible, to adapt depending on the destination. So as the India Working Group, I believe the immediate steps for us will be to spread awareness of what sustainable tourism truly means for the travel and tourism industry, since currently it seems to be a concept that is partly understood or misunderstood, as you must have seen from Ram's presentation. Having, like I said, having spent 2.5 decades in commercial tourism, I have been there, so I know that there's lots to be done. For those who understand what sustainability is, they will need guidance on how to use the criteria effectively in practice when it comes to tourism. Further, we must create an impact, by getting industry bodies and leading travel and hospitality business to adopt sustainable practices within their organization. Of course, besides, also promoting sustainable travel so that others can also follow. Now, looking at the size of the Indian travel and tourism industry, it's a humongous task that lay ahead of us. Hence, we need all the help we can get from the governments, the ministries, the industry, the tourism workforce, the GSTC board and members, and volunteers to help achieve this vision. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rajesh. Yes, it is indeed a humongous task, which is the reason why I managed to expand the team as far as India is concerned, and I'm very grateful that there are more team members working here. Now, with this, I must say that the India Working Group is formally formed and launched into the market. So we hope to be able to contribute to sustainable tourism as far as the country is concerned. I conclude here. Aditi, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ram, and thank you for taking us through, the history of GSTC, where it currently stands. And a quick question, I know that somebody had asked, how do we become members of the India Working Group? As of now, write to one of us, and our LinkedIn and other accounts also there on the GSTC website, and we'll get back in touch with you. Now, actually, without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Arvind Singh, Secretary, Ministry of Tourism, who's joined us. Thank you, sir, for taking the time out in your extremely busy schedule that you've had. I would like to just introduce you to the participants. Mr. Arvind Singh has been appointed Secretary, Ministry of Tourism in Jan of 2021. He joined the Indian Administrative Services in 1988 after acquiring a bachelor's and a master's degree in economics from Stephens College, Delhi, and the Delhi School of Economics. He was first assigned as the Assistant Collector at Aurangabad and as the Chief Executive Officer of Aurangabad and the Nagpur Zilla Parishads. After a stint in the Chief Secretary's office at Mumbai, he moved to Kolhapur as the District Collector. Moving to the center in 2001, he worked in various ministries, including Commerce and Shipping, as the Private Secretary to the Ministry of Agriculture. He previously was the Chairman of the Airport Authority of India, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, the Additional Chief Secretary Energy in the Government of Maharashtra, and served at the Embassy of India, Tokyo, as the Minister for the Economic and Commercial between 2014 to 2017. Mr. Singh has attended training courses at Geneva Graduate Institute and Harvard University. So I thank you and I welcome you to give us the keynote speech for today's webinar. Thank you.
Durband and friends, Mr. Ramkumar and all the members of the newly appointed India Working Group. It is an honor for me to deliver the keynote address during this knowledge session, and which is taking place under the aegis of the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. The requirement of sustainability in the tourism sector and its need could not have been arisen at a better time than today, as the unprecedented pandemic, which the whole world has witnessed, has compelled all of us to step back and to rethink deeply, to realize, and make efforts towards tourism that is more and more sustainable. And that is something that all travelers and all involved in the trade are talking about. Now, findings from surveys done by two major global travel organizations have shown that not just globally, but even locally, travelers are becoming increasingly conscious of the adverse environmental, social, economic, and cultural impacts of tourism on local communities, and hence are seeking more sustainable options in the mode of travel, accommodation, and experiences. Plus, as we saw at COP26, the emphasis on newer forms of energy has made the world even more conscious of moving to sustainable sources of energy also. Now, tourism can be a key driver of inclusive community development, contributing to resilience, inclusivity, and empowerment, while safeguarding natural and cultural resources. And this challenge can be met by revisiting and redeveloping the tourism strategies for sustainability. And in order to give prominence to sustainability in India's tourism, we in the ministry have prepared the draft national strategy and roadmap for sustainable tourism with focus on adventure, sustainable, and ecotourism. This will help us in achieving the full potential of adventure and ecotourism as a vehicle for tourism, conservation, and employment generation. Now, the principles of sustainable tourism apply to all forms of tourism and all kinds of destinations, and therefore need to be adopted by each and every one rather than only specific forms of tourism. However, ecotourism and adventure tourism, which have great potential for promoting sustainable tourism, have been the focus of our strategy that I mentioned earlier. And it may be pertinent here to mention that rural tourism, ecotourism, adventure tourism, conservation tourism, community-based tourism, pro-poor tourism, responsible tourism, volunteer tourism, and geotourism are all aimed at strengthening the ultimate goal of sustainable tourism at the macro level, while providing meaningful tourism opportunities at the micro level. Now, a key area of the draft national strategy and roadmap for sustainable tourism is the finalization of a scheme for certification for sustainable tourism as per the Sustainable Tourism Criteria of India, the STCI principles and indicators for destinations, accommodation sector, and tour operators in consultation with industry. And as you are well aware, that the STCI was launched in 2010, covering first the criteria for accommodation and tour operators, and then by 2014 on destinations. And the STCI is based mainly on the Global Sustainable Tourism Council's criteria. And in fact, taking inspiration from the GSTC, we work towards formulating standards on sustainable tourism based on 4 pillars: sustainable management, socio-economic impacts, cultural impacts, as well as environmental impacts. Going further, I feel destination stewardship is the key to future sustainability within the travel industry. And to satisfy the definition of sustainable tourism, destinations must take on an interdisciplinary, holistic, and integrative approach, which includes 4 main objectives. It demonstrates sustainable development management, maximizes social and economic benefits for the host community, minimizes the environmental impact on the destination, and protects the cultural heritage of the local destinations. The global pandemic that we have all witnessed in the last year and a half plus is demanding radical changes in the way businesses are operated. With the tourism industry all set for a comeback, and we are seeing the green shoots of recovery in domestic tourism, and we expect that the recovery will bounce back to pre-pandemic times soon. The next few years, that is 2022 and 23, will see phenomenal changes in the way tourism operates. And the obvious choice will be to undertake conscious travel, options which throw up good sustainability standards. And we know that globally countries are today putting in place rigorous restrictions on unsustainable travel. And soon we'll see the world over travel and tourism industry will take up these challenges and change themselves, adapt themselves to more and sustainable practices. And I'm sure policy will back these. Now, tourism in India being a state subject, state governments plan and develop tourism as per their policies. We are aware that a clear direction to adopt principles of sustainable tourism and develop schemes for the tourism industry in a holistic manner is needed to facilitate adoption. And we will and continue to work with stakeholders and all global bodies such as the GSTC to ensure that this priority policy area receives the attention it deserves across the length and breadth of the country. And I'm glad that the GSTC is giving emphasis to India by forming the India Working Group, a first for any country in the world. And this is testimony to the fact that India is a very important tourism destination and the commitment that we are seeing in the country towards sustainable tourism. I wish the GSTC India Working Group the very best and expect it to be part of the discussions and help in making India a favorable, preferred, and sustainable tourism destination. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Singh, very much for the presentation. We now have Mr. Randy Durband to give us the talk. To very quickly introduce Randy, who's known to many of us. Randy has had 2 careers in the travel and tourism space, 20 plus years in senior leadership positions at some of the finest US tour operators, having served as the president for Traveloka, Intrav and Clipper Cruise Lines, brands within the TUI Travel company, plus executive vice president of Talk World Discovery. Following that, in his second travel and tourism career, Randy advanced the work of sustainable tourism as an advisor, consultant, and speaker. He brings his knowledge of the business of travel, his global network of travel professionals, and a passion for sustainability to support the GSTC and the general sustainable tourism movement. He has held several broad positions and committee memberships in travel and tourism organizations and is a frequent speaker on sustainable tourism issues. At GSTC, he holds the role of the Chief Executive Officer. Randy, over to you. Thank you. And Randy will talk to us about the global perspectives linked to sustainable tourism and lessons that we can learn for India and the applications that we can take from that. Thank you, Randy.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much, Aditi, and thank all of you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for joining this. Thank you, Ram, for being an exceptional member of our board of directors and pulling this August group of the Indian Working Group together. We're very happy. GSTC, 2 things I'd like to emphasize that I think Ram has already really covered, but to emphasize, the GSTC criteria are the world standards. They're not ours. They were not made in a closet by a committee. They're not Western standards. They're not a small group at all. We manage a highly inclusive process to create and revise the criteria. So they're your standard as much as they're mine or anyone else's. So that's a key point to make. That also that we're extremely non-commercial. We're extremely mission-based. I hope you'll go to our website and download the GSTC criteria. They're there free of charge. For most ISO standards, you pay 158 Swiss francs, $150. But our standards are free. We give our intellectual property away for free. And I hope you understand and appreciate the fact that we're intensely mission driven. We don't get major subsidies from anyone. We get modest revenue from our programs, and we absolutely depend upon the good work of volunteers such as this India Working Group, people committed to a more sustainable world. So thank you all in the working group and all of you for being with us here today. Before I go into my prepared remarks, Roy and I chatted. I'm going to address one of the questions, a very good question that came on the Q&A, because it's very relevant and directly related to my presentation. But it's to the point of what is the difference between GSTC certification and B Corp, and what is their relationship? So it's an excellent question. So let me just start off with that one. B Corp, B Lab, if you're familiar with it, is an international movement that puts a score. It's a score rating system for businesses on their responsibility and on their sustainability. So it's for all sectors. We're actually informally involved. We've been talking to a group there's something like 55 or 60 businesses in the world, at least, that are in travel and tourism that are part of B Corp. It's a grading system where a company will do some self-scoring, and then they get some external verification. So we're very much intrigued by that. And we like their approach, and we don't feel like we overlap. We feel like we complement each other. In our work, Ram has presented to you that we have two sets of criteria: the GSTC industry criteria for the private sector and the GSTC destination criteria, which serve as policy guidance in the public sector and as a guidebook for good destination management. The industry criteria we see as guiding principles for any type of business that's involved in travel and tourism. However, we've really put a lot of effort in our 14 years of existence for a highly technical description of good application of the industry criteria and good certification to the industry criteria for hotels and for tour operators and land transport. So we haven't touched aviation, we haven't touched car hire, this and that. And as of course, all of you, I think, can appreciate the fact that tourism is extremely diverse. One could argue it's not a sector, but it's a collection of many sectors to create the visitor economy. And so we're focused on hotels and tour operators, and we consider the hard work we put together in 14 years as really leading expertise in those areas. Whereas B Corp is far more general, that any type of business can use the model. So we would argue that a tour operator or a hotel would be better served using our structure because we've customized it to their situation. And other businesses where neither we nor anyone else has really provided that very specific guidance would be very well served to use B Corps. That's really the difference. They're a generalist kind of approach to various businesses. So having said all that, I'm going to open a PowerPoint of my own. And Ram, thank you for the excellent job of presenting who we are. So my theme then is to talk about the impacts that GSTC is having on sustainable tourism globally. Now, you already saw this from Ram, but it really bears repetition and emphasis that both of our standards are based on these four pillars. That Section A of both sets of standards are about governance and management. A destination needs a good management structure. A business needs a good green team and sustainability team and a good governance structure with KPIs for staff and so forth. And then sections B, C, and D relate to social aspects, cultural and community, and D on environment. And, you know, Frida made the point in her comments earlier that in sustainable tourism, we're talking about not just doing less harm, avoiding harm, but doing more good. And to her point, look at the language on the headers of sections B, C, and D. And you'll see that what they have in common in the language of the headers is absolutely to the point that Frida made, that in sustainable tourism, what we're talking about is doing more good and less harm. Look at the language: maximize the benefits and minimize the negative impacts. And that's the case with social issues, the case with cultural and community issues, and the case with environmental issues. So thank you very much for framing that up. Frida, very nicely said. So this is really the basis of our work. So Ram has kind of queued that all up for you. So let me talk about then how do you take the standards and apply them. I'm going to talk a little bit about the destination and the public policy side, and then spend a little bit more time on the industry side to really talk about impacts and supply chain development and other aspects of it. So if you haven't looked at the criteria yet, here's just a little bit of a flavor. This is section D, the environmental section of the industry criteria for the public sector, for the private sector. So you can see that we cover the various aspects of environmental issues. And it's technical, it's kind of broke down into specific things. Each criteria has this, 2 or 3 or 4 word header, then it's got a 1 to 3 sentence description, and then it's got multiple performance indicators. So it brings in a very detailed approach to all of this. And then here's from section C of the destination criteria, just to give you a flavor of what it looks like. And again, I encourage you to go to our website because it's free of charge to download them and put them to good use. This is a very interesting criteria in visitor management in the public sector. I think this is done, frankly, very poorly generally in the world. Typically, societies around the world have thought tourism just sort of happens. And therefore, government reflects society, and government has seldom, in most corners of the world, really put together a planning and development agency. Typically, the public sector is spending money on promotion and very little on planning and development. It's really been changing dramatically the past 10 years, which is an excellent trend and move. I would argue it's rather late, but better late than never. And so we're seeing tremendous movement. This is an extremely important element for them to study. And there's not a good textbook on this because the challenges at each destination are rather unique and specific. And so the solutions to them are unique and specific. So we call upon all destinations of the world and all public sector policymakers of the world to really go to school on this issue. Have experts on your team that study case studies because you learn more about case studies of what's working and what's not working around the world on this than any simple magical formula. So I like to highlight that issue. The GSTC criteria are very much tied to the SDGs. We've formally mapped them, as Ram has said, to the destination criteria. We've completed the process of mapping them to our industry criteria. We've not publicized that yet because we just need a little bit, one more little step internally for kind of a formal launch of that. But we think that the best way to apply the SDGs in travel and tourism are to use the GSTC criteria because everything is really there that is in the SDGs. So we map it in both directions. You can start from the SDGs and go 1 through 17 to map from the SDGs to the GSTC criteria and the other way around. From each criteria, we show you which SDG, one or more SDG elements are included within that specific criterion. So they're an excellent tool to apply the SDGs. A little bit more about who we are is about who our membership is. This is just a small sampling, but you can see here some of the largest brands in the world: Booking.com, Agoda.com, Airbnb, Hilton Hotels. We have 22 national members, from Japan to Indonesia to Germany to not Germany, but Portugal and Norway and Greece, states in the United States, provinces and municipalities all over the world, many major brands, NGOs, academia, really a diverse set of members. Within our membership, I think we have a who's who of experts on sustainable tourism for various projects we can put together for advice on various elements. So more than anything, we're a network. And so this just kind of gives you a little sense that it's a very diverse membership, and it has some major international brands that are putting us to good work. And what all of that has in common, all the work that we do, it's based on the GSTC criteria. We tend to get known more for certification, and we regret that. We'd challenge you and ask you to think of us first and foremost as the keepers of global standards. And then from those standards, there's so much you can do with the standards. Raise awareness, use them for training. As Ron said, we have our own training program. Just simply reading them thoroughly and sharing it with your staff and reading it thoroughly, and you'll understand the holistic nature of sustainability. So various members and governments that we work with are all applying the criteria in their own way, in a way that fits the context of what their strategic needs at the moment are for them to go up the ladder or down the path in the journey to sustainability. Everybody's at a different stage. We'd like to say at GSTC that sustainability is a journey. And so wherever you start on that as a beginner or far along or halfway along the trail, you know, the criteria provide guidance for continuous improvement. So first of all, think of us as the standard keeper and providing guidance in the journey. We don't think of any business or destination in the world as sustainable. We're all flawed. And it's a continuous process of recalibrating based on changing technologies and changing social conditions and market conditions. It's a dynamic process. I don't think we'll ever be fully there. We're quite a ways off. Hopefully we'll be there as a planet. We need to protect the planet and make it all sustainable. So so the criteria then used in a variety of ways by a variety of people. We're very proud to be very global. Much of the sustainable tourism community, I think, is a bit too European centric. There's a lot going on in ecotourism in Latin America and elsewhere, but whatever condition of different organizations are, we're very strongly Asia oriented. We're very global, very proud of that. Among the 22 national members, we've done a lot in Indonesia, Sri Lanka, in your neighborhood, but throughout Asia, we're working very closely with Japan. Thailand, we've been in very deep with Senator Kun Wirasak, who was 2 times the Minister of Tourism. He's our friend. He knows us well. Look at this quote in the national newspaper of Thailand in 2018. He said, we have to stop just thinking about the numbers and the quantity of visitors. And we really have to look at the qualitative aspects. And he became the champion in the Thai government at this very senior level to say the GSTC is our roadmap. And he's put money behind it with the academy that has a significant amount of GSTC training in the Thai language. And that's really making impacts by spreading the word. Because I think that awareness is the thing that's really needed and that's really lacking. Across a couple of continents, over to Europe, Switzerland Tourism used us for about 16 months. We were senior planners, advisors in the development of a full national strategy that they call Sustainable. We're very proud of that. The Tourism for Tomorrow Awards at WTTC, unfortunately, were suspended, not because of coronavirus. The WTTC unfortunately decided to stop these. We consider these among the finest awards programs in the world. In St. Kitts and Nevis Islands in the Caribbean were the winner of the prestigious award on destination stewardship. And the judges specifically pointed out that a key piece was that their SDC, their Sustainable Destination Council, was a key driver. And this is a very interesting point that I really want to emphasize. In the destination criteria, criterion A1 says that because governments manage tourism best, where governments engage a whole government approach and engage the private sector, engage all stakeholders, and create some kind of council to manage stakeholder engagement and stakeholder input, that's how they manage best. So that doesn't mean they give up their authority and their budget. That means that's just good management, because the Department of Tourism has to look at transport, they have to look at education, they have to look at investment. They need a whole government approach. They have to engage the private sector. And our friends in St. Kitts were early adopters of our destination criteria. They were one of 14 destinations in the world that helped field test them back in 2012 and 2013. And when we launched the destination criteria, and they kept this council in place, and they will tell you extremely how important this was. It spread out to their neighbors. The Bahamas just hired us to help develop councils throughout the Bahamas and so forth. So what's quite remarkable here about this, and I think is a telling story, is that if you look at the photo, that's myself and our Kathleen Pittman on flanking. We both have been judges in those awards. We manage our conflict of interest intensely at GSTC. So we were not judges in this category because we had consulted and coached them in the past. But we were just proudly on stage after they won the award. Of the 2 ladies in the center from St. Kitts, the tall one, DNL, she's been there for many, many years. And so she's provided a continuity that is absolutely essential. We see all too often in the public sector around the world, people cycle through the tourism departments locally and in national ministries. And the Minister of Tourism standing next to her was probably her 4th or 5th Minister of Tourism, but they all had the wisdom to say, hey, this is a good program, we're going to keep it. That is a key formula for success, of continuity, of internal capacity. It's all too rare. So that continuity is a critical decision, success factor, and creating a council is a success factor. 2 years before, the year before in 2018, was also a GSTC member who won that prestigious award. And then the year before, Botswana and Africa, one of our 14 early adopters that have been deep in with us. We've been working with them on the development of their national system for a long time. The point is, the criteria work. They make sense. They're proven. They're field tested in cultures all over the world. And so when they're put to work by the public sector, good results come of it. Now, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about sustainable tourism generally and come back to our impacts and switch to the private sector from the public sector discussion. Issues that we've seen recently in sustainable tourism is that the hottest issues that people have been talking about, greenhouse gases, of course, the climate is in crisis. I like to not use the phrase climate change, but use the more accurate phrase of climate crisis. So it's good that that has been raising, the societal awareness around the world has been going up. We've only discovered in the past 10 years that we're all eating plastics with almost every bite we take because it's entered our food chain. And so plastics are a critical concern. Before the pandemic, we were talking much about over-tourism, many sites overcrowded, many cities dealing with citizens' protests against too many visitors in my neighborhood. So these have been some recent trends. More recent trends in the COVID era, of course, health safety was the major issue that businesses have been dealing with for the past nearly 2 years now. And then out of it came, along with the despair we were feeling and the frustrations that kind of brought some things to light, certainly as part of the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States, but that spread globally of this focus on what we like to call DEI, dignity, equity, inclusiveness. Let's hope that's here to stay. I think it is. And then illegal wildlife trade kind of rose to the forefront as we thought about what are the causes of coronavirus. So these are some new trends. We hope they'll all stay. And this is kind of just to set the tone of what a lot of people are talking about, certainly in sustainable tourism globally. You know, we like to say tourism is resilient. And indeed, tourism is resilient. I've been working in tourism now for 40 years. And it is amazingly resilient. It always comes back. But I think by just saying it's resilient, we're missing a very critical point. There's really two meanings of resilience. There's multiple meanings in the dictionary, but the two core meanings are the ability to endure and the ability to recover. And I would say when you look at both of those meanings, we have very opposite reports and ratings, I would say, for tourism. Yes, the ability to recover is amazing. Humans love to move around. We need breaks mentally. We have to step out of our daily lives and go someplace, whether it's to visit family or go out into nature or whatever it is. Tourism will always be there. So it recovers amazingly well. And because it recovers amazingly well, we keep talking about its resilient. But I would argue we only talk about its resilience to recover so much because it's amazingly fragile. 5 days of an Iceland volcanic eruption years ago destroyed 1/3 of profits of most European tour operators for the entire fiscal year because of the shutdown of aviation, a tsunami, a typhoon, political unrest, all sorts of factors just shut tourism down in a given spot, in a given region for extended periods of time. And now we just saw on a global basis, devastating 90% reduction for many businesses. I call that fragile. I think we have to learn from that and really take coronavirus to heart to realize, hey, yes, there will be tsunamis, there will be epidemics, there will be problems. We have to plan for that. That's actually in the criteria as well. Risk and crisis management. This is from the destination criteria. But I think this is a lesson businesses need to learn. I know this is not easy, but having cash reserves, having some kind of program to engage your staff to keep your skills level so you can rebound after a crisis. These are things that destinations and businesses really need to think about. It is a fragile world. Tourism is fragile. Safety and security, health safety, also in the criteria. Many people have asked me, Randy, will you be revising the criteria to deal with coronavirus? It's like, no, it's all there. Everything you'd want to deal with in terms of managing and preventing the worst cases of the impacts from an epidemic or a typhoon or anything else are already in the criteria. Now let me change gears for kind of a final discussion on assurance, which is the basis of a supply chain. How am I doing on time, DT? I think I'll need about 5 minutes more.
Yeah, no, Randy, yeah, you have another 7 minutes, 7 to 8 minutes.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. So I want to talk about the impacts of GSTC on supply chain development and business practices. The foundation of that is what I want to present here. Let's think about how do we assure compliance with the GSTC criteria. So if you're going to provide assurance of any claim in life about how intelligent I am or how beautiful you are, you can have no verification where we don't talk about it. If you talk about it yourself, that's what we call first party. It's not impartial. When I say I'm intelligent or I'm skilled at tennis, what does that mean to you? Well, it means nothing because I have no credibility talking about myself. I could be just boastful and not objective. Second party would be someone talks about my business or my person, but their impartiality is not certain. So let's say you want to talk about your business's sustainability, but the second party that is external to yourself might be your brother-in-law, might be a client. So the impartiality is not certain. True assurance on sustainability claims to avoid greenwashing have to come from the outside. So we believe passionately in third-party certification. So we've put a great deal of effort in our 14 years to provide guidance on good certification. So as I said earlier, we become a little bit more known for certification than when we really want to be known first and foremost as the keeper of standards that can be applied in many ways, and certification is one of them. But certification is so complex, so difficult, we put huge amounts of effort in to provide guidance on it that we can become quite known for it. So third party is someone who's impartial. So your business hires some expert, an auditor from the outside, to come inside and examine you, give you the tough love to say you're doing well here, you're doing poorly there. That's truly impartial third-party certification. We believe the best third-party certification for sustainability in travel and tourism are those that have voluntarily come to us, where we put them under a microscope and provide an accreditation service. And we've been doing this now for 6 years, where various certification bodies voluntarily come to us. We have an accreditation manual that's based on relevant ISO standards, largely ISO 17065, the ISEAL Alliance Assurance Code. Ram has introduced to you earlier, the ISEAL Alliance. We've adhere best we can to their standard setting code, to this point, to their assurance code, and also to their impacts code. So we look at the best guidance in the world from ISO and the ISEAL Alliance on certification for sustainability. And we've put together years in development an accreditation manual to provide guidance to a certification body on how to certify in a rigorous, credible, impartial way. Nobody in travel and tourism in the world comes close to what we've done in this effort of a highly transparent process that's mission-based, that's credible, that's objective. And again, transparency is the key thing. You can go to our website and download our accreditation manual and see what it's all about. It's all there. And the process is rigorous. That is the foundation for what we think is a brilliant supply chain development scheme. And before I describe that, one comment here on first party. Here are 3 major international brands that have rich internal programs. All 3 of these companies are GSTC members. Intercruises has 150 some ports. They're a DMC around the world, and then 2 major hotel brands. The reason I put these 3 up, they all have very rich internal programs. They know they cannot certify themselves. So they've got an internal program that helps all of their locations, all of their business units improve, because they've got an internal system speaking their internal cultural language for their business with guidance on improvement. But they know that each individual business unit should get the third-party certification by a GSTC accredited body. So Ram has walked you through our programs. He talked about our training and the destination work. And let me just kind of focus then on our market access, which is a key element of what we do. Before I talk about what we do, let me give you this as by way of background. Here's an example of one of the great challenges we face in market demand and market confusion about sustainability. Lufthansa Airlines, the great German carrier, has done a great deal of market research, and they ask these questions of their travelers that, would you like to see sustainable travel options when you book a flight with us? 78% said yes. Would you be willing to pay extra for reforestation? 73% said yes. So Lufthansa looked at those numbers and they made it easy on their website at point of purchase, at time of booking, that the traveler can choose to pay a small fee to offset the impact of their flight, and only 1% do it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is very typical of what we're seeing in the world, is that travelers and consumers are increasingly concerned about the state of the world. They want to travel more sustainably. They want to travel more responsibly, but do they do it? Do they pay for it? No. When they are focused on booking, they're focused on price and the type of product that speaks to my self-identity and the type of experience I want to have. But think about it in our daily lives. Do we, when we go to the supermarket and to the pharmacist, are we reading all the labels on what's organic and what's sustainable? Even if we're super green, I don't think we're all so good at doing that. None of us do it 100% of the time. The best of us might do it 20% of the time. So this moves into the area of where we're going. We've modeled ourselves after successful models in other sectors. In 1993, FSC was created, the Forest Stewardship Council. They were completely unknown for a dozen years, just like we were, busily building the technical foundation for this structure. Then eventually major corporations, major producers and distributors of wood and paper products got on board. Kimberly-Clark, one of the world's largest distributors of paper products, Kleenex tissues, Scott toilet tissue, all sorts of paper products that are produced globally and marketed under different brands. They have gone in a big way with FSC certification and ISO 14001 on many, many of their products. So now when you walk into the market and you're buying tissue, there's a very good chance that's been sustainably produced with an eco label by FSC. You didn't make a choice as a consumer. You may or may not have read the label. You probably didn't. Let's face it, the best of us don't as often as we should. But Kimberly-Clark helped make that decision for you. And so the store where you're buying that at a retail didn't even think about it because it's in the supply chain. So we're taking that model and we're applying that to travel and tourism. TUI Group, the European giant that's in India, and I was president of 3 of their brands, as Aditi mentioned in my introduction, in the United States. They've gone very in a big way with using the GSTC. This slide is actually dated. It says 80% of their group-owned hotels have certifications. It's now nearly 90% of their hundreds of hotels. They spent about 7 years really focused on that. They're now in the final stages of developing new 2030 targets, and they're going to now push their external supply chain of the hotels they don't own, the thousands of hotels around the world that they contract with. They're going to give preferred contracting to hotels in the coming years that are certified by somebody we've accredited. Okay, this is coming. And then they've been matched in the UK market by 2 other major brands, EasyJet Holidays and Jet2 Holidays. This gives massive market share from the UK outbound market that over the course of the next 3-4 years is going to push aggressively in their supply chain development. So hotels that want to get their business may want to consider this quite seriously, because this is what they want, and they're going to start announcing this in the coming months, that they want this in preferred contracting. This model really started for us when our friends at WWF, we've been very close to WWF from our inception. WWF DNA is all over GSTC, the most known sustainability NGO in the world by far, and they have worked with FSC and all the others for a quarter of a century. They're doing a lot with Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines, the second largest holding company of cruise ships in the world. And they set a number of targets with Royal Caribbean for emissions reductions of their ships, seafood purchasing that are MSC equal labeled. And look at this one at the bottom. They set a target where 1,000 of their shore excursions, when the client gets off the ship at a port for a shore excursion, that by 2019 would be operated by a tour operator that's certified to the GSTC accredited scheme. They greatly exceeded that in year 1 or in 2019. And this is going on strong. So then, because of the strength of that, Their CEO, Adam Goldstein, was also the chair of the CLIA, the International Trade Association. He stepped aside recently. And he and CLIA CEO Kelly Craighead and I shared the stage for a morning full day session with their Ports and Destinations Committee in Hamburg, Germany in 2019, and presented what Royal Caribbean had done very successfully. And immediately MSC Cruises signed up. And immediately other brands started talking to us. The coronavirus just shut down cruise entirely. So those discussions stopped, but all of their sustainability teams, the different brands, have indicated to us they want to come back. Ladies and gentlemen, this is very impactful, and I really want you to reflect upon this. If a Royal Caribbean DMC at a port got certified sustainable so that they could get or keep the contract with Royal Caribbean, because Royal Caribbean is showing preferential contracting. Royal Caribbean's policy is where price and quality are similar, they'll choose the DMC that's certified. And they'll give them a 3-year contract instead of a 2-year contract. That DMC that services Royal Caribbean on a Tuesday, do you think on Wednesday and Thursday they're acting less sustainable with other clients? No, they've altered their business practices. This is tremendous power, and it has exponential power. And now Kelly Craighead, the CEO of CLIA, is very excited about doing this as collective action to increase their profile as an industry. Very, very powerful model. Now just think on the hotel side with TUI or the DMC side with Royal Caribbean. If those companies, those businesses were to analyze all their options of all the suppliers they could potentially work with, it's a never-ending process. They would need massive teams internally studying the policies and practices of all those companies. But we've done all the hard work for them. We've gone through a tedious accreditation of the better certification bodies. And if the certification is renewed and valid, they stay on our list of preferred DMCs and hotels that are going to them. We're now sending those lists to Booking.com that's testing it with hotels. It's being picked up in a variety of ways. Raman mentioned the state of Gujarat this is a draft policy. They've not put this into place, but what a brilliant approach. They're actually looking at subsidizing tour operator certification. What a brilliant thing. If you want tourism more sustainable in your country, your state, your province, your city, push the industry, right? The city of Amsterdam in the Netherlands has a big riverboat trade. They're not allowing a riverboat to dock in the city center if they're not green certified. If not, the riverboat has to dock outside the city and they have to take the clients in by bus into the city center. You can guess every riverboat, 250 strong, want to get certified yesterday. A destination has great power. And you know what? Certification's not expensive. It's expensive if you don't think you need it. But if you can get the Royal Caribbean contract over it, or you get the TUI contract because of it, or you get a subsidy from your government for 50%, wow, I don't even have to go bother, I don't have to send a sales agent to Royal Caribbean to get that contract anymore. All I have to do is get certified, and I'm making my product more compelling, my service more compelling to my other clients. It's a strategy that very much works. We'll share this link to this TED Talk. I highly recommend this TED Talk by WWF, one of the best 18.5 minutes you could ever spend on sustainability, where they lay out the strategy that they've been applying in other sectors. Their research of doing this a quarter of a century in many sectors is that they know that if they can convince the suppliers that reach 25% of market share in a given thing, that because of that exponential effect that I talked about, that Royal Caribbean, the DMC, has different clients in addition to Royal Caribbean, that the companies representing 25% of market share, if they convince them to operate more sustainably, they have other clients and they're actually impacting 40 to 50% of production. If you want to adhere to SDG number 12 in travel and tourism on responsible consumption and production, this scheme puts consumption and production together. It forces production to be more sustainable, and it drives more sustainable consumption because you're putting the product in front of the customer. It's a model that works. It all requires multi-year strategies, because you can't just say to the hotels that you want to contract with, we want you certified tomorrow. They need time. So all the successful programs set a timetable to say to all their suppliers, this is where we want to be in 2 years. This is where we want to be in 3 years or 4 years. And get started on it now. And then hold firm to it 3 years from now. Set targets that are attainable, but you give them a reasonable amount of time and not decades. I saw a brilliant cartoon joke on Facebook about COP26 on carbon and all the discussion of net zero by 2050, a great cartoon, or not a cartoon, a photo of a guy holding up a beer with a big smile on his face. And he said, I'm going to stop drinking alcohol in 2050. I think this brilliantly says it. Can we wait until 2050 for a carbon neutral world? No, we need to move a lot faster. And I think 3 years is reasonable for everything I've just said. Set targets, hold true to the targets. You can do great things. You can go to the moon in 7 years. It helps to have the United States government budget behind you, but you can do this in 3 years, no matter your size. And this is a model that works for businesses of all sizes. So a quick review of key points I'm trying to make is that standards support a universal approach for awareness, measurement, management, reporting. Any Indian scheme can be Indian, but at the same time, be harmonized with what we're doing internationally. You don't have to give up your national identity or state identity or municipal identity to use these schemes. Secondly, consumers, travelers are concerned, but they're confused. They don't know what to do. So thirdly, this B2B supply chain provides what the customer really wants and what the world really needs. So I thank you very much for your attention. And again, my heartfelt thanks to Ram and the whole working group and all the wonderful work you're doing. And everybody on the call today, remember, we're a network. We're not a closed club. We invite you to participate. We invite you to use the GSTC criteria. They're there for you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Randy. And to be able to share examples, that have worked, whether it is from the industry, whether it is from destinations, and in a certain sense, really talking about, even in a business sense, sustainable tourism makes sense. It is not just that it is about a concept, it is something else, but just business-wise, when you go further, that's something that one gets to look at, clarifying a lot of the concepts of GSTC for us and the step-by-step process. Thanks very much for that. What we'll do now is that we do have an open session of discussion. We've already got a few questions that had come into us through the registration forms as well as on the Q&A. Let me post that across first to the panelists. And then if there are further questions, please put them into the Q&A session. We've got about 20 minutes to go in the session, and let's sort of take as many as we can. So the first couple of questions that I do have, one of it that has already come from the Q&A, and maybe if Ram could respond to this, is that what do you think is India's current stand or understanding on the concept of sustainable tourism? While the increasing eco demands by consumers are well established, are we really prepared to meet them?
Yeah, I'll answer that, Aditi. Are we prepared as a country to meet them? Yes, we are. I mean, can we meet them now? No. There's still a lot more work to be done. Like Mr. Arvind Singh in his own talk said, and I had mentioned also, we've done the background base work. We have the sustainable tourism criteria for India. That base work was done in 2010, 2012. So now all we need to do is, and this is what we are talking to Mr. Arvind Singh's team, is to take that criteria, take the sustainable tourism criteria for India, get it updated to the present criteria of GSTC, because that was written way back, it hasn't been updated. We need to do that. And once that standard is recognized through a process in GSTC called recognition, then that becomes India's national standard, which the Ministry of Tourism will own, much like national standards, which Randy mentioned a few other countries are owning. And what we need is a national standard, which reflects the reality of our country here, which has been done. So in my belief, 70% of the work is already done. Once this process of recognition through GSTC happens, then the government of India, Ministry of Tourism, can tell certification bodies to start to accredit themselves to certified. And then the ball starts to roll there. All you need is 1 or 2 OTAs to come on board, and we are talking to a few of them also, to say that we will give special preference to people certified under a GSTC scheme, under the STCI scheme. And suddenly, like what happened with Kimberly-Clark and FSC, it happens to the STCI in India. So is it possible in India? Very much, because like I said again, 70% of the work is done. And will it happen soon? I'm sure it will, now that we've gained some momentum post-corona era. I'm sure the conversations which we've initiated through this webinar, and as everybody can see, Ms. Arvind Singh has sat through the whole place, the whole time here to listen to this. So, and I'm sure, you know, we will get there as a nation. And if we do that, we will truly be the first country of the size that we are to truly move towards sustainable tourism. You know, and will it happen? I'm sure it will happen soon. Aditi?
Yeah. Thank you, Ram. I think the next couple of questions, and Mr. Arvind Singh, if you could respond to this from the Ministry of Tourism's perspective. I think to some extent, Ram touched upon it to say that, there is the STCI criteria, but the question that has been put here is that, it has been 10 years since the tourism criteria had been adopted. But is there something that is holding the ministry back from implementing it?
No, there's nothing. As I mentioned in my talk, there's nothing that is holding us. There is, the very fact that we came out with a national strategy paper and we put it in the public domain was to, ensure that we take it forward in the correct and calibrated manner that is needed given this very important issue. As I also mentioned in my remarks, the COVID pandemic has given attention, greater focus to that. So we are serious about the strategy paper that we've come out with. And once all the stakeholders' comments and all are received, we will, come out with a very updated and, corrected version of the strategy paper out in the public domain.
Yeah. And I think following that, there was a subsequent question that had also come to us from a couple of the other participants, which is that, what is the Ministry of Tourism's view regarding or ensuring the proliferation of GSTC, the STCI, looking at GSTC criteria for travel tourism industry, as well as, for a lot of the small and upcoming destinations that are coming. There, on the one hand, there is over tourism, and we're talking about that. Second is that linked, because of COVID, there are many more travelers who are going to remote, fragile ecosystems. And what would the Ministry of Tourism look at and think about in that regard, especially within the framework of sustainable tourism?
What we can do is we can develop a broad, the framework which our strategy paper mentions, and there we have said that we will roll out the STCI and bring that into and ensure that it is implemented properly. We were also thinking of ranking of states on the sustainability criteria. If that will kind of push in, show that we are serious about it, and also lead to some kind of healthy competition among the states. But at the micro level, things that largely I think the action would have to be taken by the state tourism boards, the state tourism corporations, how to ensure this use of sustainable practices at these fragile ecosystem destinations, but we'll surely help and guide them. But we are serious at the macro level to push for STCI and for a ranking of states on the basis of sustainability.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Singh. I think the next question is a couple of other questions. One is about, who pays the government in terms of the reimbursement. I'm assuming that this is linked to the point of the Gujarat tourism for the tour operators. And the Gujarat tourism needs to come up, they need to first notify their policy, the draft, which is the draft tourism policy right now. And they will later come up with a scheme to be able to look at that. There is another question that is also from Mandeep Singh from the Responsible Tourism Society of India. And Ram, if you can look at this,
Sure.
which is to say that the Responsible Tourism Society of India invites the GSTC India group to lend their shoulder to the national standard STCI being brought up to date and operationalized as we go along with the Ministry of Tourism and UNEP India. Ministry of Tourism and UNEP India have an MOU, and the pilots for the STCI have already been done pre-COVID. So hopefully this is part of your mandate.
Yeah, absolutely. As a standard setting body, which is what GSTC is, and as Randy mentioned, all that we want is that sustainable tourism standards that have been developed from a global scale are followed by any nation. Of course, countries will need to customize it, and GSTC India will most certainly support anybody who wants to put their shoulder to the wheel to ensure that Indian tourism becomes more sustainable. And that is something that we welcome. And yes, definitely we'll be in touch with Mandy and his team on this issue. Most definitely, yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Another question that just come in for Mr. Singh, which is to say that how much of the new STCI will be included in the hospitality and the tourism curriculum? There is an absolute dearth of real world information in this category.
The questioner to send me his or her suggestion on my email, sectour@nic.in, and we'll definitely have a look at it.
Yeah.
Let me just sort of take that also, Aditi.
Yeah.
The sustainable tourism training, like again Randy said in the beginning, there is a training program which runs concurrently, but more importantly, students of tourism have access to all the criteria details free of charge on our website. So it doesn't matter whether Mr. Arvind Singh mandates that it's included in the curriculum or not of hotel and tourism schools, because they have pressure to finish whatever curriculum they have. All this knowledge is available free of charge for anybody to download from the GSTC website. So I would encourage all students to please go through the website if they're interested and download it and enrich yourself immediately. There's no need to wait for anything. Of course, the government of India will look at it to see, how much of it can be. And at one time we did sort of speak to Skill India also to see how much of it can be incorporated. No need to wait. Just download it free of charge. It's all available.
Yeah, thank you. I think there was another question that had come up, which is, GSTC has different kinds of membership. And maybe the link to that is already something that Roy has shared in the chat box. So please, to the participants who had that question about how can you become members to GSTC, visit their website, just take a look at it. All that information is there. It can be individual or organizational and other aspects of it. So take a look at that website and sort of follow the process that needs to be done over there itself. Yeah, I think we are okay. There are a couple more questions coming in. Can the government influence universities to adopt the GSTC criteria? I think those
I'm just looking at the questions, Aditi, without sort of posing this again to Mr. Singh. Let me just quickly to say that, the government will do what it needs to do. And this is something that I tell everybody in the private sector. Tourism is a private sector play. This every time telling the government to step in to do what the private sector is meant to do is again being unrealistic, making unrealistic demands. The government will look at overall policies, but tourism is a private sector play. And I would encourage everybody here, universities, schools, private sector, it is for us to put our shoulder behind the overall macro objectives that the government has set. And Mr. Arvind Singh has very clearly said that. And also in the climate change conference recently, the Prime Minister also said that. Now it is for all of us in the private sector to rise up and go and tell the government, hey, we are doing this. Engagement with the government, rather than constantly saying, okay, government, will you do this? Will you do that? I'm not saying don't make demands on the government. I'm sure we could. But we need to do more than that as a private sector is my only point to that.
Yeah. All right.
You also reached the 2 hours now.
Yeah, we're close to that. And I think those were also broadly the set of questions that we'd received both from the registration as well as on the Q&A. So I would like to join and thank each of our panelists, Ramkumar, Mr. Arvind Singh and Randy, for sort of taking us through the whole aspect of sustainable tourism. How do we understand it from the GSTC perspective? And I know that the India Working Group looks forward, along with other groups, organizations, working with the Ministry of Tourism on the national strategy and the roadmap, looking at STCI, the schemes that are available, as well as working with the tourism industry. There are other accreditation bodies, working with everyone to work towards sustainable tourism in the country. So thank you all very much for joining this presentation and the webinar today. Yeah, Ram.
And I want to say a special thanks to Mr. Singh. Mr. Singh, that's not very often that we have a secretary who will sit through an entire session. And I think for everybody who's listening, who's part of this group, this itself shows that, things are different now, that Mr. Singh sat through. So I want to say thank you, Mr. Singh, for sitting through the whole session.
No, thank you. I truly enjoyed the whole session. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you again to everybody. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you.